So Nancy Cordes is joining us now from Capitol Hill, along with CBS News White House correspondent Paula Reid and Bob Litt. He is a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and he's joining us from Washington. So we're going to start with you, Nancy. We heard in your piece about the new information from Taylor's testimony regarding what a staffer told him about a phone call between President Trump and U.S. Ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland. What's the significance of this information? Because after all, Taylor wasn't there, so he's learning this information from a staff member who told him about it later. So this is brand new information.
It is brand new information, and while it is something that Taylor himself did not hear, what Democrats say is that it is yet another example of the president's intent. One of the arguments that Republicans have made is that a lot of this evidence is circumstantial. People who thought that they knew what the president wanted instead of, the word coming from the horse's mouth. In this case, they say there was a well-respected staffer at the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine who says he overheard the president himself saying, hey, what's the deal with these investigations? Democrats argue there's other evidence that comes straight from the president as well. They point to the president's phone call where he asked the Ukrainian president point blank to look into the Bidens. And they say there's his acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, who stood at the White House podium and said that they do this all the time. And while he rejected the notion that it was because of the Bidens, he did say that there were certain things that the president wanted in order for this aid to be released. So Democrats say it's another piece of the puzzle. They're bringing this individual, David Holmes, in to testify behind closed doors tomorrow. We haven't gotten any word whether they're going to have him testify publicly as well, but Republicans are sure to say that this is somebody who says they heard something, finally relaying it several months later, and they're likely to discount the information.
Paula, the president yesterday said he was, quote, too busy to watch the hearing, but his Twitter activity during the hearing yesterday suggests something different. Look, if you're in an echo chamber, you heard what you wanted to hear yesterday, and the president's Twitter feed this morning suggests, as he's retweeting folks like Jim Jordan, that they think they scored a win. Democrats think that they scored a win. So what are you hearing from your sources in the White House about what they saw yesterday and what they anticipate in the days ahead?
That's right. Even though the president said he wasn't watching, that didn't stop him from weighing in. In fact, even though he said he didn't actually have eyes on a TV screen, he was weighing in and criticizing the format of the questioning, in addition to tweeting over 30 times. But as you noted, a lot of those were retweets of people who believe that he has been wronged here, his allies, and some of the White House Twitter accounts that were pushing out his message, which is that he is going to continue to fight, and Democrats are trying to stop him and prevent him from fighting for the folks who sent him here to the White House. Now, he also had some help in pushing out his message yesterday. The press secretary, pretty reclusive, Stephanie Grisham, she was on Twitter pumping out the message. They were also pushing out talking points. Yesterday was the kind of coordinated messaging approach that we would have expected to see over the past few weeks. But really, we saw it for the first time in full effect yesterday. And most of the sources I've spoken with here in terms of the hearing, they say somewhat sarcastically, it was even more boring than they imagined. And they don't believe that in the long run, this hearing or any of the hearings coming up are truly going to damage the president's standing. Clearly, no one wants impeachment, but they do not believe the president will be removed from office. But they clearly are concerned enough to at least put out a coordinating messaging effort, which in this White House, I will tell you, is pretty rare.
So, Bob, what we heard from many of the Republicans in terms of their criticism of the testimony from the two witnesses is that it was based on secondhand information or hearsay. So anyone who's watched legal dramas will hear, objection, hearsay, sir. But can you talk to us? It's sort of a two-part question. What exactly is hearsay? Did you hear hearsay from these witnesses, because they were testifying to what they observed and also the perception of what they observed, what they believe was the sort of the underlying message being sent out. So was that hearsay, or was some of it hearsay and was some of it not? And is hearsay something that you just automatically throw out?
Well, it depends upon whether you're talking about the context of a trial in a court or whether you're talking about the kinds of things that you use to make decisions in your ordinary life. There is a rule that says hearsay, which is an out-of-court statement by someone who's not testifying, is generally not admissible in a trial, although there are lots of exceptions to that. And I frankly haven't thought through the extent to which any of those exceptions might apply. But that doesn't mean that in your ordinary life, hearsay can't be very reliable. And what you have here is a very consistent pattern that's entirely consistent with what the president said in his conversation with President Zelensky, with what, as Nancy noted, Acting Chief of Staff Mulvaney said, and which all fits together into a pattern that suggests that what these people are hearing is in fact accurate and reliable.
Nancy, let me ask you about David Holmes. Now, he is the staffer who provided those explosive details of Gordon Sondland's call with the president to Taylor. He is scheduled to testify behind closed doors tomorrow. Meanwhile, Sondland will testify at an open hearing next week. It does feel, we were saying this yesterday as we were watching these hearings, Nancy, that Gordon Sondland is in for what I expect to be sort of a brutal hearing from both sides of the aisle. How crucial will his testimony, and I guess Holmes as well, although to the question as to, what he heard and what he thought he heard, there's a lot you can play around there. But Gordon Sondland seems to be a linchpin here.
He is, and he's a bit of a wild card. For a lot of these witnesses who are testifying publicly, we essentially already know what they're going to say because we saw the transcripts of their private depositions. In Sondland's case, it's kind of an open question because, as you recall, he testified initially saying that he didn't know anything about a quid pro quo. He wasn't aware of it till the very end. But then he came back and submitted this 3-page addendum that said, oh, yes, now my memory has been jogged by the opening statements of all the other witnesses. And actually, I did know about a quid pro quo, and I'm the one who delivered that message to the Ukrainians, telling them that they were going to need to open these investigations if they wanted the president to release military aid. What that enabled him to do, though, was get away without answering any questions about who told him to deliver that quid pro quo. Was it the president himself? Did the message come through the president's acting chief of staff? Was he freelancing? Was he just interpreting what the president wanted? Those are the kinds of questions that Democrats and Republicans alike are going to be asking him. And it could be very revealing in getting back to this question of personal firsthand knowledge. If Sondland testifies that it was indeed one of those many phone calls he apparently had with the president in which the president said, hey, tell them that I need them to open an investigation into Joe Biden before I'm going to release this aid, then, that is certainly a pretty powerful piece of firsthand knowledge.
So, Bob, lawyers for both parties led the first round of questioning yesterday, and then lawmakers sort of followed up afterwards. How did the questioning differ between lawmakers and lawyers, and what are the benefits of using counsel to start off these sort of hearings?
I think there are two benefits. One of them comes not from using counsel, but from the fact that the initial round of questioning was 45 minutes long. The standard questioning by members of Congress at a hearing is 5 minutes, and as we have seen many times, 5 minutes is not enough to get any kind of coherent questioning out. Particularly when, and this is my other point, the members of Congress are frequently more interested in making a speech than in actually asking questions of the witness. The lawyers who did the questioning were not looking to get on local television, looking to advance their own electoral prospects, and so they did a much calmer, more organized, and more focused set of questioning that actually was able to carry a story through, as opposed to the very short, argumentative back and forth from members of Congress.
So listen, Paula, the president has been teasing that there was another phone call and he was going to release the transcript. This is a phone call to the president of Ukraine. And as my understanding is that it's a phone call that happened before the July 25th phone call. Any news on what the contents of that call might be and when that transcript will be released? And will we get the full transcript?
Well, it's our understanding that this was a call back in April, mostly a congratulatory call following the election, and the president insists that it's perfect. And he believes, and some folks in the White House believe, that if they put this out, it will help establish a pattern of completely appropriate communication between the president and the leader of Ukraine. Yesterday, the president suggested he may release that today, but I have to remind you, over the weekend, he said he would release it on Tuesday. It's not clear if this transcript will actually come out, because other officials in the White House point to the fact that this is probably not actually going to help the president's case. Just because you have a fine conversation in April, that does not undermine this mounting evidence of an apparent alleged conspiracy to pressure a foreign government to investigate a political rival. Just because you said congratulations and nothing else in April to a foreign leader does not mean you didn't have a conversation with Gordon Sondland about possible investigations by Ukraine into your political rivals. It may not help the president's case as much as he would like, which is why I'm skeptical about whether the White House will actually release this, because it doesn't seem like it would make much news or really move the ball for the president at all.
Yeah, it's a good point. And Nancy, to the point that Paula was making, the president, it's interesting as you watch folks like Jim Jordan go after the two individuals testifying yesterday and what he was focusing on, and then you listen to the president and you read the president's tweets. The president keeps saying, perfect phone call. I didn't hear one Republican yesterday talk about how perfect that phone call was. No one I've seen in the last couple of days coming out and using that defense, even though the president, that's the message he keeps sending, which is that it was a perfect phone call. And so I wonder if there is still that disconnect. Are you hearing from Republican lawmakers that there is still a disconnect as they go out there and defend the president in ways that they see that are probably a little easier to do, at least when it comes to the way the public perceives it, versus what the president is saying, which is that everything's perfect, nothing wrong, no quid pro quo?
Well, they are taking a tougher line now than they had in the past, Vlad. I mean, he always had his staunch defenders, but there were a lot of Republicans out there saying it wasn't the right thing to do. I don't know that it's impeachable, but I wish he hadn't done it. The official line now coming out of House Republicans, partially in response to all that urging from the president, is that there wasn't anything wrong, that he was motivated not by a desire to investigate the Bidens, but by a desire to clamp down on corruption in Ukraine. That is their stance. And it's interesting because on one hand, Republicans are saying there isn't enough evidence, firsthand evidence of the claim that Democrats are making, that there was a quid pro quo. And yet the argument that they are making has far less evidence backing it up, that actually the president was deeply skeptical of Ukraine because of the corruption in its past. And that's why he suddenly withheld this military aid this summer without alerting the Pentagon or his embassy in Ukraine or the State Department about why he was doing this, but just suddenly mysteriously holding up the aid and leaving everyone, including the top Republican here on Capitol Hill, the leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, to sort of wonder what was going on. But nevertheless, Republicans have gotten the message from this president that he wants them to defend him staunchly. And so while they may not all be saying the call was perfect, they're certainly taking a tougher line than they were even just a week or two ago.
And just to that, I mean, you could hear the emotion in Ambassador Taylor's voice as he talked about the thousands of Ukrainians who've been killed in defending their country against Russian aggression and knowing that the aid had been held up.
Yeah, very true. So listen, before we let everyone go, Paul, I got to ask you about what kept the president so busy so that he could not be paying attention to the hearings. He was hosting the president of Turkey, Recep Erdogan. I think at any other time, us in the media would have been so focused on this meeting, but, something else was going on. What can you tell us about what they discussed? What can you tell us about the nature of their relationship?
Well, let's set the stage here. This was a visit that many people weren't even sure would actually happen, because remember, Republicans and Democrats have condemned Turkey for its incursion in northern Syria after the president's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from that region. But yesterday, as most of Washington was focused on what was going on the Hill, the president greeted the leader of Turkey here, but so did a few hundred protesters outside the gates here at the White House, mostly protesting Turkey's actions in Syria, specifically specifically against our Kurdish allies, the folks who have fought alongside the U.S. in the fight against ISIS. There are also protesters here marching against general human rights abuses. Now, during this visit, though, the president had a meeting in the Oval Office with the leader of Turkey and 5 GOP senators who had been critical of him. Now, different folks walked into this meeting with different agendas, we have learned. These GOP senators, they thought they were there to help the president convince Turkey not to buy Russian military equipment and instead convince them to buy American. But the leader of Turkey had a different idea. And CBS News has learned that during this meeting, he whipped out an iPad and showed these senators a propaganda video depicting the Kurds as terrorists. And he believed, we've learned, that this possibly would change the Republican senators' minds about the Kurds. Now, the Republican senators pushed back. We've learned that everybody left the meeting as they entered it. No hearts or minds were really changed, but it certainly created a very awkward, uncomfortable situation here at the White House. But as you noted, because everyone was focused on what was going on in the Hill, not too many folks were paying attention to what was going on here at the White House.
Yeah, Nancy, it's been reported that Senator Lindsey Graham, who's been very vocal about the recent moves in that part of the world, said to Erdogan, well, I could get the Kurds to put together a video to show you the number of people that your country has slaughtered. I mean, what are you hearing from lawmakers about, where they are going to? I mean, we hear that so many Republicans are staunch defenders of the president when it comes to this impeachment inquiry, but there have been breaks, specifically when it comes to foreign policy, with Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and now here in Turkey. Pretty strong words from Senator Graham there.
Right, and I think it's going to be very difficult to change Republicans' minds on this particular issue. They see the U.S. as a staunch ally of the Kurds. They were horrified when the president decided to pull the U.S. military out and abandon the Kurds last month, and they'd be very unlikely to be swayed by Erdogan showing them a clip on an iPad. In fact, some of these senators probably did not appreciate being ambushed in that way, but it sounds like that was the entire reason that this meeting was convened, was to see if perhaps some of the senators who have been on the president's side on other issues might be convinced to come around. It raises a lot more questions, though. Is the president really trying to convince Congress that there's no harm, no foul here, and that Turkey has done nothing wrong, and that the real enemy are the Kurdish people? That is going to be a very tough sell here on Capitol Hill among Democrats and Republicans alike.
Yeah.
All right.
Nancy, Paula, and Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Up next to testify tomorrow is former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. Vlad and I will be here with a team of correspondents and experts for live coverage. That's starting at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. There will also be a special edition of Red and Blue tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern to break down all of the day's events. And remember, you can keep up to date with this story by visiting our blog at cbsnews.com/impeachment.